There is a place in the state of Georgia where no criminal ever wants to go. That place is called Alto State Prison, formerly Lee Arundel in Alto, Georgia. If you come here, you surely won't make it out.
Stay tuned for tales from the toe.
The Alto Shuffle. Will Gervonta Tank Davis make it out alive? Part 1. Chapter 1. Arrival in Atlanta. Boxing champion Gervonta Tank Davis arrived in Atlanta, eager for a weekend of celebration at the city's renowned annual boxing convention. Known for his relentless power and speed in the ring, Tank was idolized by many, and his presence in the ATL created a buzz throughout the city. Staying in one of the city's most luxurious hotels, Tank was living the high life, enjoying fine dining, room service, and the exclusive amenities reserved for elite guests. With a weekend of amateur and semi-pro boxing events ahead, he decided to relax and soak in the perks of being a living legend. One evening, Tank's driver, an Atlanta native with an ear to the streets, made a suggestion. Man, if you're looking for a place to really enjoy yourself, you got to hit up Tongue and Groove. It's one of the best spots in town, good vibes, and the women, ass and titty central, my G. Curious and ready for a night out, Tank agreed. Later that night, dressed in his signature designer drip and diamond chains, he made his way to Tongue and Groove, located in the heart of Buckhead. The nightclub was alive with flashing lights, pulsating music, and a crowd eager for a glimpse of the boxing champ. As soon as Tank walked in, heads turned and whispers spread through the venue. People knew they were in the presence of greatness. Tank hit the dance floor, enjoying the energy of the club and the attention he was getting. With a drink in hand, surrounded by fans and admirers, he let loose and embraced the vibrant nightlife of Atlanta. He wasn't just the king, he was a boxing god and drank bottles of $1,000 liquor. The good vibes got even better when a mysterious woman entered the picture. Chapter 2, The Bitch at Tongue and Groove. The bass of the music pounded through the dimly lit club as Tank moved fluidly across the dance floor, his presence commanding attention. The energy in Tongue and Groove was electric, and Tank was fully in his element. Dressed in Burberry and Versace, he attracted stares from all corners of the room. As he danced with a short, light-skinned woman with green eyes, feeling the rhythm take over, he let himself forget about boxing, the crowds, and the pressure of being a champion. Then, out of nowhere, a second woman appeared. Without hesitation, she shoved the first woman aside, her eyes locking on Tank. The first thing he noticed was that she was way taller than him, at least 6 feet tall, and she had the roundest ass he had ever seen in his life. "I've been waiting all night for a dance with you, sexy man," she said confidently, her voice cutting through the music. Tank, known for his charm and smooth talk, raised an eyebrow, but couldn't help but be impressed by her boldness. This woman had an undeniable magnetism, her allure pulling him in effortlessly. "Is that so?" Tank asked, flashing his signature smile. "Well, I guess I can make some time for you." The night progressed with laughter, more bottles, and dancing. The second woman, who told him her name was Alexa Mexico, seemed to have everything Tank was looking for at the moment. Confidence, beauty, and a nice fat ass to grab a hold of when she rode his mechanical bull later on. They spent the next 4 hours together, their chemistry undeniable as the club's lights began to dim and the crowd thinned out. When the DJ announced the final song of the night, Tank, feeling invincible, leaned in close and whispered an invitation. "Let's keep the party going at my hotel, Lex," he said smoothly. She agreed with a mischievous smile, and they left the club together as the neon lights of Atlanta flickered in the background. Chapter 3, The Disgusting Discovery. Back at the hotel, the atmosphere shifted as the night's excitement followed them into the luxury suite. They were alone, the city lights spilling into the room through floor-to-ceiling windows. What started as playful banter quickly became more intimate. The two losing themselves in the moment. But as things progressed, something gnawed at Tank, a small but growing sense that something was off. The way she moved, subtle shifts in her demeanor, it all seemed slightly different. His instincts, honed over years in the ring, began to tingle with unease. The expensive champagne that fueled him all night suddenly started wearing off a bit. He had heard stories about Atlanta and how it had a huge transmission problem, especially in the nightlife scene, and how several men were tricked by these transformers into thinking they were females when they really weren't. Alexa definitely appeared to be a woman. Tank would have bet $1 million that she was a female. She had the vocal tone, the body build, and the face of a natural woman, but this is what a little money to buy hormone procedures and surgeries can do for you. Tank's heart raced, but not with desire, as he slowly pulled his stiff pipe out of her backside as she lay bent over the bathroom sink after a round of booty loving due to her claiming it was that time of the month so he couldn't poke the kitty cat. He stepped back, whipping her around to face him, and studied him closely, searching for answers by looking down at her, it. Then, in a moment of sobering clarity, Tank made a discovery that sent shockwaves through his body. The woman he had invited back to his room wasn't who she appeared to be. She had been born a man and appeared to have gotten every operation done except the one that counts. Stunned, Tank's mind spun, overwhelmed with emotions, betrayal, confusion, and anger. How could this happen to him? How could he have missed the signs? He had already stuck it in, and once you go that far, you can't just go back in time and reverse it. So, does this mean he's Team Rainbow now? Fuck no! The shock quickly turned into a boiling fury. His fists clenched instinctively, years of muscle memory from the ring taking over his rational mind. "You tricked me," he yelled, his voice thick with rage. In the heat of the moment, Tank lashed out, throwing a combination of punches without thinking, an instinctive reaction from a man whose fists had ended careers. The blows landed with devastating force, the same kind of power that had knocked out countless opponents in the ring. But this wasn't a controlled fight. It wasn't an opponent wearing gloves and headgear. This was raw life. The creature crumpled to the ground, the sheer force of the punch causing immediate damage. Tank stood over it, breathing heavily, the red haze of anger slowly lifting. But it was too late. The rainbow monster on the floor wasn't moving. Panic set in as Tank realized the gravity of what he had just done. He knelt, shaking Alexa, but there was no response. Blood began to pool on the carpet, the result of a brain hemorrhage caused by the force of his 17 punches. The very hands that had made him a world champion had now led to a deadly mistake. Tank staggered back, his world crumbling around him as he realized he had just crossed a line he could never return from. Chapter 4, In the Ring with Fannie Willis. Later that morning, Tank was arrested and the world of boxing stood still. Gervonta Tank Davis, known for his quick hands and thunderous knockouts, now found himself in a battle outside the ring. A charge of first-degree murder loomed over his head, and with it, a media frenzy. His fame made sure of that. The details were sketchy, but the public knew this much. A trans man lay dead after an altercation with Tank in his penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta. The victim, built like a swimsuit model, had approached the champ aggressively earlier at some club and was later invited back to his hotel room. Tank claimed self-defense due to the victim seeing his $700,000 worth of jewelry on the nightstand and trying to rob him for it. But in the eyes of the law, it wasn't so simple. Investigators saw no evidence of a robbery attempt. Enter Fannie Willis, Atlanta's no-nonsense district attorney. She had already made a name for herself with high-profile cases, but this one had the entire country watching. The cameras loved her. The people feared her. She wasn't swayed by fame, fortune, and certainly not by some Baltimore boxer's fame. To her, it was another case in the fight for justice. Willis moved swiftly, bringing first-degree murder charges before the ink on Tank's arrest report had even dried. The city buzzed with anticipation as Tank's camp scrambled to build a defense, hiring one of the best attorneys money could buy. But the courtroom wasn't the ring, and no amount of physical training could prepare Tank for what lay ahead. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, boxing fans, and curious onlookers. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and whispers filled the gallery. Fannie Willis was in her element, calm and composed, laying out her case with precision. Mr. Davis is a professional fighter. His hands are weapons, licensed by the Boxing Commission, she began, her voice sharp and cutting through the silence. He knew exactly what kind of damage he could inflict. And on that night, he used his skills, not in the ring, but on the streets. Tank's defense attorney, a polished man with a track record of acquittals, fought hard. He emphasized the victim's size advantage, arguing that Tank, at just 5 feet 5 inches, had no choice but to defend himself against a man who stood 6 feet. My client was outmatched by a man 7 inches taller than him and clearly intent on harm, he insisted. This was a case of survival. But Willis was relentless, hammering home the idea that Tank had other options. He could have walked away despite being tricked into thinking the victim was a woman. The media, always eager for a scandal, painted him in a darker light with each passing day. Headlines screamed boxer turns killer and from ring to prison. Despite his lawyer's best efforts, having been paid 100,000 big ones by the boxer, the tide turned against Tank. The jury couldn't ignore the narrative Fannie Willis had built. To them, Tank was a man who had allowed his violent instincts to spill out into the real world, and the consequences were fatal. Yeah, the victim should have told him he was a man before they did that nasty thing, but that doesn't mean that he deserved to be unalived. When the judge's gavel finally came down, it was like a knockout blow Tank hadn't seen coming. 7 years in Alto State Prison for manslaughter. The courtroom erupted with gasps, and Tank stood motionless as if caught between disbelief and acceptance. Outside, the media swarmed once again, this time with a new story. Tank Davis sentenced. But inside, as the cameras flashed and voices blurred together, one thing was clear. Tank's biggest fight had only just begun. And this time, it wasn't for a belt. Chapter 5, Entering Alto. As the prison gates of Alto State Prison clanged shut behind him, Gervonta Tank Davis felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Anger, fear, disbelief. It wasn't the first time he'd been in a fight, but this one was different. No referees, no roaring crowd, just cold concrete and steel, and the knowledge that his fame, the very thing that had made him untouchable in the outside world, had now become both a shield and a target. He walked through the intake process with his head held high, his mind still adjusting to the grim reality of what lay ahead. Every guard, every inmate seemed to know who he was. Some nodded with respect. Others stared at him with jealousy, hatred even. They knew Tank, the boxer, the champion. But here, he was just another inmate, assigned a number, a cell, and a fate he couldn't fight with punches alone. As he stepped into his assigned cell, the walls seemed to close in around him. There was nothing glamorous about this life. The chipped paint, the smell of sweat and unwashed nuts and armpits, the distant clamor of voices from down the block. It was all a harsh reminder that this was not his world. Yet he had no choice but to survive in it. The first few days were cool. Some of the inmates whispered his name like a legend. Others stared at him with cold, calculating eyes. Tank knew exactly what those looks meant. He wasn't just a celebrity to some of these men, it was an opportunity. They saw his fame and wealth as something to exploit, to take. And in this place, respect was currency, paid in violence. And his first altercation came quicker than expected. 8 days into his bid, a group of 3 inmates approached him on the yard, testing him, sizing him up. The leader, a tall, medium, brown-skinned man with a hard look in his eye and Crip gang tattoos all over his face, threw the first punch. It was sloppy, telegraphed. Tank dodged it easily, his instincts kicking in. The next few moments were a blur of fists and blood. Tank barely broke a sweat, his training and reflexes taking over. Within seconds, the man was on the ground, and Tank stood over him, fists clenched. Word spread fast after that. Tank ain't no joke, they whispered, and for a moment that earned him respect. But it was a double-edged sword. With each fight he won, new enemies emerged. The guards watched him more closely now, as if waiting for him to slip up, waiting for a reason to strip him of the little freedom he had left. The second fight came in the chow hall. A larger inmate, this one more dangerous, had decided it was time to make a name for himself by testing the champ. Once again, Tank handled it, but not without a price. His hands, wrapped in bruises and cuts, reminded him that this wasn't the ring. There were no breaks, no rounds, no bells to signal the end of the fight. Every day was a grind, and survival was never guaranteed. Despite his victories, Tank couldn't relax. He could feel the tension building around him like a storm cloud. The quiet stares from across the yard, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room. His fame was both a blessing and a curse, and it made him stand out in all the wrong ways. Each night as he lay on his top bunk staring at the ceiling, he felt the weight of his reality sink in. In here, his fists were his only defense, but he knew deep down that he couldn't keep fighting forever. His ops were growing bolder, and every fight won only fueled their desire to see him fall. In a place like Alto, falling could mean more than just losing a fight. It could mean losing everything. Now, this shit is just getting started, so hit the link on the screen to check out part 2 and find out if Tank's luck runs out and he finally loses his first fight ever. And if you haven't liked this video and subscribed to the channel, go ahead and knock that out.